Okay, so today we're going to dive into a book that's had a pretty big impact, I think, and it's The Gifts of Imperfection by Brené Brown.
Yeah, it's a really good one.
It is, and I think at its core, the book is really about, um, moving away from this idea that we have to fix all of our flaws
Mhm.
and really embracing those things as part of who we are.
Right, it's kind of a perspective shift almost,
Yeah,
like moving away from that need to be perfect and to kind of present this perfect image to the world, and instead embracing those imperfections and seeing them as strengths.
exactly, and I think one of the things that Brené Brown, yeah, she's a researcher.
Yeah, she's done a lot of work on vulnerability.
Yeah, vulnerability, courage,
Yeah.
shame, all of these things. And I think, one of the powerful things that she says in this book is that our imperfections are not weaknesses to hide, but they're actually gifts to embrace.
Yeah, and that's really what this whole deep dive is going to be about.
Right.
It's about how can we kind of stop chasing that external validation and start living more wholeheartedly.
Exactly.
Like really embracing who we are.
Yeah. So let's talk about vulnerability,
Okay.
which is one of the first big things that she
Yeah.
talks about in the book. And I think, a lot of times we think of vulnerability as a weakness, as something to avoid.
Yeah, it can feel really scary to be vulnerable.
Right. We build up these walls. We don't want to show any cracks.
Yeah, we want to present this perfect image like
Right.
we've got it all together.
Right, exactly. But her research shows that vulnerability is actually the birthplace of like innovation and creativity and change.
Yeah, when you think about it, anytime you try something new,
Right?
you're putting yourself out there, you're taking a risk, and that's vulnerability.
Exactly.
And it's through that vulnerability that we can actually connect with other people
Right.
and grow as
Right.
individuals. If we're always trying to be perfect, then we're never really letting people see who we really are.
So true.
Yeah. And we're not giving ourselves the opportunity to learn and grow from our mistakes.
Absolutely. So
Yeah.
one of the action steps that she talks about in the book is, instead of trying to project this image of perfection, try sharing something real with somebody that you trust.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
Like it doesn't have to be this huge thing. It can
Right.
just be something small, you
Yeah.
know. And see what happens when you do that.
I think a lot of times we're afraid that if we show our imperfections, people are going to judge us or reject us.
Right.
But actually, the opposite is often true.
Right.
When we're willing to be vulnerable with people, it allows them to be vulnerable with us.
Exactly. And it creates a much deeper connection,
Yeah,
than just this superficial surface level interaction.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So let's move on to the next one,
Okay.
which is perfectionism.
Perfectionism, yeah. And this is something that I know I struggle with, and I think a lot of people listening probably struggle with too.
Yeah, it's so common.
It is. And it's easy to mistake it for just striving for excellence.
Yeah.
Right.
Like, oh, I just want to do my best.
Yeah.
But I think there's a really crucial difference there.
Yeah, perfectionism is driven by fear.
Exactly.
Like a fear of judgment, a fear of failure,
Right.
and it can really hold us back in life.
Absolutely. I mean, it can lead to anxiety and stress and even procrastination.
Yeah, you get so caught up in the what ifs.
Right.
What if I'm not perfect? What if I fail? What if people judge me?
Right.
That you don't even start.
Exactly. And so the shift that she's suggesting is to focus on doing your best,
Right.
you know?
And recognizing that mistakes are part of the process.
Right.
They're inevitable.
Right.
And they're actually valuable.
Exactly.
We learn from our mistakes.
Yeah, and if you're hesitating to start something
Yeah.
because it's not perfect, yet remember that progress is always better than perfection.
That's such a good point.
Yeah.
So many people get stuck in that perfectionism trap
Right.
and they never actually get anything done.
Exactly. Because they're so afraid of making a mistake.
Right. So let's talk about self-compassion,
Okay.
which is another big theme in the book. And I think it's so interesting how we can be so much harder on ourselves than we would ever be on anybody else.
Oh, absolutely.
We would never say the things to our best friend
Right.
that we say to ourselves in our own heads.
Yeah, it's like we have this inner critic
Mm.
that's just constantly berating us
Right.
and putting us down.
Yeah. And so self-compassion is really about recognizing that and
Mhm.
being kind to ourselves.
Yeah, it's about treating ourselves with the same compassion that we would offer to a loved one.
Right.
If our friend came to us with a problem,
Right.
we wouldn't tell them they were stupid or worthless.
Exactly.
We would listen to them and we would offer them support.
Right.
And we need to do the same thing for ourselves.
So one of the things that she suggests is to ask yourself, when you're being really critical of yourself, Would I say this to my best friend? And if the answer is no, then, maybe you need to reframe that thought
Right.
a little bit.
Absolutely.
Okay, so another big idea in the book is living wholeheartedly
Okay.
or authenticity.
Yeah.
And she defines authenticity as the daily practice of letting go of who we think we're supposed to be and embracing who we are.
It's about shedding those masks that
Yeah,
we wear to try to fit in,
right.
to please other people.
Yeah, and that's exhausting.
It is so
You're
exhausting.
performing all the time.
Yeah, and it's not sustainable.
Right,
You can't keep that up forever.
right.
Eventually, you're going to burn out.
Yeah, and I think that true happiness comes from being genuinely yourself, not seeking external approval.
Exactly.
When you're authentic, you attract the right people into your life.
The people who love you for who you are,
Right.
not for who you pretend to be.
Exactly. And one of the action steps that she talks about is, do something today that reflects your true self
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
without worrying about what other people are going to think.
Like, what's something that you've always wanted to do,
Right.
but you've been afraid to do because you're worried about what people might say?
Right.
Just go for it.
Yeah.
Life is too short to live for other people's expectations.
So true.
So let's move on to the last one,
Okay.
which is gratitude and joy.
Yeah.
And this is something that's really important to Brené Brown.
Right.
She believes that practicing gratitude is essential for living a wholehearted life.
And I think it's interesting because she reframes happiness.
Yeah,
It's not about having everything you want,
right.
but it's about appreciating what you already have.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And research has shown that people who regularly practice gratitude are happier and healthier.
That's so interesting.
It's really amazing.
Wow.
Like, gratitude actually changes your brain chemistry.
Wow.
It releases dopamine and serotonin,
Really?
which are the feel-good chemicals.
Wow.
So it's like literally making you happier.
That's so cool.
And it also helps to build resilience.
Right.
When you're grateful for what you have,
Right.
you're less likely to get caught up in the things that you don't have.
That makes sense.
And you're more able to cope with challenges.
So one of the action steps that she suggests is to write down 3 things you're grateful for every morning.
Yeah, that's a great one.
It doesn't have to be anything big.
Yeah.
It can just be small things.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm grateful for my cup of coffee this morning.
Right.
Or I'm grateful for the sunshine.
Exactly.
Or I'm grateful for my dog.
And just taking a few minutes each day to focus on what you're grateful for can really make a big difference in your overall well-being.
So true.
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive,
Yes.
the key takeaway here is that you don't need to be perfect
Right.
to be worthy of love and belonging.
Absolutely.
Your imperfections are what make you unique.
Right.
And they're what make you beautiful.
And strong.
Yes, and strong.
And true strength comes from embracing those imperfections.
Yes.
And having the courage to be your authentic self.
So here's a thought for you to consider today.
Right.
What's one small imperfection that you've been trying to hide?
Hmm.
And how might embracing it just a little bit change how you see yourself or interact with the world around you?
That's such a good question.
I think we all have those things that we're trying to hide.
We do.
And it takes courage to let them be seen.
But I think when we do,
Yeah,
it can be really liberating.
absolutely.
It can be really freeing.
So I encourage you to give it a try.
Yeah, me too.
See what happens.
That's great advice. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Yeah, this has been great. Thank you.
Okay, take care.
You too.
Bye.